When I was younger, I viewed my father through the eyes of a child. I noticed the rules before I noticed the responsibility behind them. I noticed the moments he felt distant more than the moments he stayed consistent. And back then, I didn't understand how easy it is to mistake emotional silence for lack of love. As a kid, you assume parents already know how to handle life. You imagine adulthood as this complete version of a person, stable, certain, in control. So when your father becomes frustrated, withdrawn, or difficult to understand, it feels confusing because children don't see pressure first, they see behavior. If he comes home exhausted and quiet, you feel the absence before you understand the reason behind it. If he struggles to express affection, you remember the distance more than the effort. And for a long time, that's how I carried my perception of him. Not as a person trying to survive adulthood, just as my father, someone I expected to always know what to do. But growing older changes the way you look at people you once thought had everything figured out. The older I became, the more I started noticing how exhausting life actually is. Not in dramatic ways, in ordinary ways. The pressure of responsibility, the constant need to keep moving even when your mind feels tired, the habit of hiding stress because other people depend on you remaining functional. And somewhere during that process, I started seeing my father differently. Not as a perfect man, not as a villain either, just a human being carrying more weight than I understood as a child. That realization felt uncomfortable at first, because it forced me to admit something I didn't want to admit before. Some of the things I resented in him existed in me too. There were moments where I caught myself shutting down emotionally instead of explaining what I felt. Moments where stress made me quieter, colder, harder to reach. And suddenly, memories that once felt simple became more complicated, not erased, not excused, just viewed through a wider perspective. I began understanding that love doesn't always arrive in emotionally perfect forms. Some people care deeply and still struggle to express it clearly, especially people who spent most of their lives believing strength meant endurance instead of openness. And I think a lot of fathers were raised that way. Many of them learned how to provide before they learned how to communicate, how to suppress emotion before understanding it, how to continue functioning no matter how overwhelmed they felt internally. So they carried responsibility the only way they knew how, silently. And when you're young, silent love is hard to recognize. Children understand warmth more easily than sacrifice. They notice affection faster than consistency, which means a father can spend years trying to protect his family while his child still feels emotionally far away from him. That realization changed something in me, because for the first time I stopped asking only, why wasn't he different? And started asking, what kind of life shaped him into that person in the first place? The hardest part wasn't realizing my father had flaws. It was realizing time keeps moving even when relationships stay unresolved. Because when you're younger, you assume there will always be another opportunity to fix things later. Another conversation, another family dinner, another normal day. You don't notice time disappearing while you're inside it. Your parents still look permanent, stable, like people who will always be waiting somewhere in the background of your life. But one day you notice small things that make that illusion crack: the gray hair, the slower movements, the tiredness in their face after ordinary days. And suddenly, your parents stop feeling endless. They start feeling human in a way that's difficult to emotionally process. I think that realization changes the way you carry resentment, because anger feels different once you realize the person you're angry at is also growing older right in front of you. There were moments where I wanted emotional closeness with my father, but didn't know how to create it naturally anymore. Too much time had already passed in silence, and the strange thing about emotional distance inside families is that both people can care deeply while still struggling to bridge the gap between them. So instead, life continues normally on the surface. Conversations stay simple. Days continue moving. Nobody says what they actually feel. Until eventually you realize years have passed that way. And maybe that's what scares me the most. Not conflict, not arguments, just the possibility of running out of time while still leaving important things unsaid. So now, whenever I think about forgiveness, I don't think about pretending the past never affected me. I don't think healing works like that. There are still memories I wish had been different, still moments I replay sometimes, still conversations that probably should have happened years earlier. But somewhere along the way, my anger stopped feeling as sharp, not because I forced it to disappear. It just became harder to hold on to once I started seeing the full picture. Because adulthood humbles you. You reach an age where you realize how easy it is to unintentionally hurt people while trying to survive your own life. How easy it is to become emotionally unavailable without meaning to. How easy it is to believe you still have time to repair things later. And maybe that's why I've started looking at my father differently now. Not through the eyes of the child who only saw what was missing, but through the eyes of someone who finally understands how complicated people become over time. I don't need him to become perfect for me to appreciate the things he carried. I don't need every wound explained perfectly before deciding I no longer want resentment controlling the way I remember him. Because the truth is, most people are fighting battles their children never fully see. Financial pressure, fear of failure, the responsibility of trying to hold a family together while barely understanding yourself emotionally. Some people survive life without ever learning how to express affection in ways that feel obvious. That doesn't erase the hurt they caused, but it changes the way you carry it. And lately, I've been thinking about how many fathers probably wanted to say more than they actually did. How many of them thought providing was enough, because nobody ever taught them another language for love. Maybe some of them assumed there would always be more time, more birthdays, more conversations, more ordinary days, until suddenly there isn't. And honestly, I don't want to wait until lost to understand somebody who's still here. Maybe forgiveness begins there, not in some dramatic moment where everything suddenly feels healed, but in smaller decisions, answering a conversation without carrying the same bitterness, sitting in the same room without mentally reopening old wounds, learning how to see the person in front of you instead of only the version of them that exists in painful memories. Because people change, sometimes quietly, sometimes too late for certain things, but they do change. And maybe we do too. There are things I wish my father had done differently, things I probably will carry for a long time. But there are also things I never gave him credit for because I was too focused on what hurt me. The ordinary sacrifices, the consistency, the pressure he absorbed without talking about it. As a child, I only saw the emotional gaps. Now I can also see the effort that existed around them. And that doesn't make the story perfect, it just makes it human. I think one of the saddest parts of growing older is realizing your parents had unfinished wounds while raising you. They were teaching lessons they were still trying to learn themselves, trying to offer stability while struggling internally in ways nobody around them fully understood. And once you realize that, blame becomes more complicated. Because suddenly, the person you resented starts looking like somebody who was overwhelmed long before you entered their life. Some people inherit softness, others inherit survival. And survival can make people emotionally difficult to reach, even when love exists underneath it. That's something I understand now in a way I couldn't before. Not because I became emotionless, not because the past disappeared, but because perspective changes when life finally exhausts you enough to recognize yourself in the people you once judged too simply. And maybe that's what forgiveness really is. Not agreement, not forgetting, not pretending pain never happened. Just choosing to leave room in your heart for the possibility that someone loved you imperfectly, while doing the best they could with the emotional tools they had. I try to pay attention to the things I used to overlook. The way my father repeats the same stories more often now. The way silence between us doesn't feel as heavy as it used to. The way ordinary conversations started mattering more once I stopped expecting them to fix everything. I spent so much time wanting our relationship to become something clearer, something easier. But real life rarely gives people perfect emotional timing. Sometimes understanding arrives years after the damage. Sometimes people care about each other deeply and still struggle to show it properly. That doesn't make the connection meaningless. If anything, it makes it painfully human. I don't know if every relationship gets a clean resolution. Maybe some things simply soften over time instead of fully healing. Maybe maturity is learning not to expect people to become entirely different before appreciating the ways they tried. And maybe forgiveness is quieter than people imagine. Not one huge emotional breakthrough, just choosing to stop feeding old anger every single day, choosing to let certain memories rest. And for the first time in a long while, I think that's enough for me. Thanks for being here. If you enjoyed this kind of video, subscribing helps more than you probably realize. I have just graduated college and I enjoy sharing my experience to you guys. Welcome to the family. I truly appreciate you watching till the end. Take care now.